Hello and welcome to the third video of the Spelling Essentials video series. My name is Shravant Malla, and in the previous video we discussed the importance of the spelling bee and how to make it the best experience you possibly can. Today I'll be discussing the basics of language and spelling rules. Even though spelling involves the memorization of many words, you can use some simple spelling rules to help you figure out the spelling of words. Rules provide a foundation on how to spell a word. In this video, I've provided some general language rules that will help you remember the basic patterns of some words. Bear in mind that these rules do not always apply to every word because, as always, there will be exceptions. Sometimes when you don't know how to spell a word, you just guess, but there is a way to create a more accurate guess by using rules. Each etymology has different rules. Besides rules about languages, there are also rules about just general concepts. By knowing these language standards and general rules, spelling words that are unknown will become much simpler with a higher rate of accuracy. Rules help you learn new spelling words in several different ways, such as, firstly, identifying patterns within words so figuring out the spellings of words is easier. Second, forming connections between words and letters that you may not have noticed before. Third, identifying specific speech patterns that can offer clues as to how a word is spelled. And fourth, explaining that words are made up of smaller words and have prefixes, suffixes, and roots. In the next video, we'll learn more about prefixes, suffixes, and roots, so please look forward to that. Rule 1. One of the most common spelling rules is I before E except after C, or when it sounds like A, as in neighbor and way. This rule is crucial because many words apply to this rule. Some of the example words for I before E include achieve, belief, or believe. And when they come after C, some examples include ceiling, conceit, or deceit. So if you notice, normally it's going to be spelled I-E, but when it comes after C, it's going to be spelled E-I. However, this rule only applies to words when the sound is pronounced with the long E sound. It doesn't apply to words such as science or efficient because they aren't pronounced with the long E sound. Neither does this rule apply to any word without the EE sound, even when there is no C involved. For example, the A sound, which isn't pronounced EE. For example, beige, feign, foreign, forfeit, height, neighbor, etc. So, if you hear the A sound, it's not going to be applied to this rule. Even though this rule applies to many words, there are still some exceptions. There aren't many exceptions to this rule, so it's going to be easier to learn the exceptions than to just study all of the words that apply to this rule. For example, seize, weird, or caffeine. Rule number 2, the E. The E is a very unique letter in spelling. Depending on where it's placed in the word, it can either completely change the spelling of the word or just completely be dropped. There are some cases when you need to drop the E. Words ending in E often lose the E when a suffix, which is the ending which is added to a word, begins with a vowel or when a Y is added. We'll learn more about suffixes in the next video. For example, we can take a look at this table on the left here. For the word educate, we'll have the suffix ion, which means act of, and the final word becomes education. So if you notice, the E is dropped and removed from the word, and the ion is added. The same applies to the next two words, arrive and judge. Arrive becomes arrival, where the E is dropped, and judge becomes judgment, where the E is dropped again. However, there are some times when you'll keep the E. Even though many words follow the rule where you drop the E, there are going to be some exceptions. For example, the table on the right has two words, like and stripe. Like plus the suffix able becomes likable, but the E is kept in the word, and the word stripe becomes stripy, and the E is kept once again. The E is also kept when the suffix begins with a consonant, as in ness, li, meant, full, less, or etc. For example, sincerely. It becomes sincere plus ly, so the E is kept. Polite plus ness becomes politeness, placement is place plus meant, and blame plus less is blameless. As with most of the rules, there are exceptions to this rule as well. In some cases, the E is dropped before the consonant suffix. For example, argument. The argument is a combination of argue plus ment, and argue loses the E, so argument is argument. Wisdom becomes wisdom, so wise loses the E. Truth, truly, ninth, and judgment all follow the same rule as well. The E is dropped and the stem is added. So that's one thing you should be remembering. Even though there are several rules to help you spell words, there's always going to be exceptions to that rule. So make sure you research and study those exceptions before blindly following the rules every time. Rule 3. This rule is pretty short and simple, but it's still very important to remember. The letter C before an E, I, or Y letter is pronounced with an S sound. For example, cent, cycle, or city. So all of these have the E, I, or Y letter after the letter C. So that's why the C is pronounced with an S sound. Rule number 4. The letter G, when it comes before an E, I, or Y, may be pronounced as a J sound. For example, gentle. So the G sound when it comes before an E, I, or Y may be pronounced with a J sound. Once again, the example is gentle, because there is an E following the G, so it has the J sound. Rule 5. The letter S never directly follows an X sound. For example, box becomes boxes in its plural form, not boxs. There's always going to be a letter in between the X and S whenever you hear the S sound following the X sound. Rule number 6. When adding ing to the end of a word that ends in C, add a K after the C and then add ing. For example, the word picnic becomes picnicking. Picnicking is spelled picnicking, and you'll notice that the K is not present in picnic in the word picnic. That's because it follows this rule where the K is added after the C. If the base word ends in Y, change the Y to I before adding ed. For example, horrified or qualified. The base word of horrified is horrify, so the Y is removed and changed to an I. And the same goes for qualified. However, make sure you keep the Y before adding ing. For example, horrifying or qualifying. Sometimes the base word doesn't change when adding ed or ing. If the base word ends in E, drop the E. If the base word ends with C, add a K before adding ed or ing. If a word accented on the final syllable ends in consonant vowel consonant form, double the final consonant before assigning the ending ed or ing. An example of this final tip is the word commit. Commit becomes committed or committing. If you'll notice, the final consonant T is doubled, so it becomes committed or ing. That's because the base word ends in mit, which is consonant vowel consonant form. Some examples of these rules include research and researched, travel and traveled, argue and argued, receive, received, mimic, mimicked, and panic turns into panicked. Rule 7. When the singular form of a word ends in a vowel plus the Y sound, just add an S to make it plural. For example, the word key becomes keys. Rule number 8. When the singular form of a word ends with F or FE, change the ending to VES to make it a plural noun. For example, the word knife. Knife is spelled KNIFE. However, in its plural form, it becomes KNIVES, knives. That's because knife ends in FE, which changes according to this rule. Rule number 9. When the suffixes FUL or LESS are added to the end of a word, the base word usually remains unchanged. For example, rest plus less equals restless, and stress plus full equals stressful. In both of these cases, the base word isn't changed. Rule number 10. Most often when a word ends in OUS, it is an adjective, while a word that ends in US is usually a noun. Many words follow this rule, but there are also a few exceptions. For example, the word mischievous, which is an adjective, so it ends in OUS, and exodus, which is a noun, so it ends in US. This is a very important rule, and it's definitely something to keep in mind when you're doing spelling bees, because you'll inevitably get a word that ends in one of these two endings, so this is going to be your best bet in guessing that spelling right. Rule 11. For our final rule, when adding an ending to a word that ends with Y, change the Y to I if a consonant precedes it. For example, supply becomes supplies. The Y is dropped and changed to an I. So supply becomes supplies and worry becomes worried. The Y is dropped and is changed to an I. In conclusion, I'd like to thank you for watching this video. Next week we'll be covering the prefixes, suffixes, and roots of a word. So keep on the lookout for that video, as it will be very helpful and is the next step to achieving spelling success. Thank you, and I hope to see you next week. Bye.